Hi guys, and welcome back to more Cells at Work Code Black. Last week was a really interesting episode where we saw the body come up against the gonorrhea bacteria. Anyway, today we're going to be looking at episode 5, which is titled Overworked, Hair Loss and Delirium. But before we delve into today's video, I'm often fascinated and amazed to see how many views these videos get. You know, we get some of them into the tens of thousands. Now, I'd really be interested to see where all you guys are watching from today. So if you wouldn't mind, before watching the rest of the episode, could you just put down in the comments what country you're watching this video from? And with all that being said, let's crack on with today's video.
白血球は苦戦を強いられ、その数を大きく減らした。今、この世界を守れるのはお前たち。キラー T 細胞だけだ。
Okay, so I remember this guy from the end of the last episode, and I assumed that he was the Commander T cell. So he's the counterpart to this guy from the original Cells at Work series. Now, this guy does look a little bit different to him. He's a bit more dishevelled and unkempt. I mean, even his appearance with his long, sort of shabby hair, and he's got these stress lines in and around his eyes. It makes him look like he's more stressed and overworked. And I also like how they've left his shirt unbuttoned and his tie a bit loose. Like someone would look like if they were sort of overworked or staying late at the office. So it's all these little subtle designs around the character that give you an overall impression that these guys are pretty stressed.
異物を発見。キラー T 細胞。ヘルパー T 細胞の命令により出動する。がん細胞やウイルス感染細胞などを異物として始末する殺し屋。
Oh wow. Okay, so basically the T killer cells are performing, of course, the haka, which is the cultural dance of the Maori culture. And, you know, most people might interpret this as a sort of intimidation tactic. However, after a little bit of light reading on Wikipedia, I've seen that it's actually performed to welcome both distinguished guests or celebrate great achievements or other occasions such as funerals as well. So it's interesting that they've incorporated it into this episode like this.
この世界に住む細胞たち、そして戦いを挑んでくる愚かなウイルスたちに今こそ見せつけろ。我々 T 細胞こそが最強であるということ。働け！
I mean, he comes across as a really pushy boss, doesn't he? The Commander T cell shouting, and that's never a sort of a good sign of a constructive leader. And maybe that's a sign of the times, you know, him being stressed and overworked. Also, I don't know if you noticed, he's sort of making jabs at the other cells at not being good enough. And it doesn't really give a good impression of the immune system generally when they're all sort of picking fights at one another with these sort of criticisms. Whereas in the original series, all the cells try to work together to reach a successful outcome. Here, it looks like they're against one another.
びっくりさせちゃった。僕たち毛母細胞は盛んに細胞分裂を繰り返して毛を作っているんだ。病気をしようがストレスを抱えてようが常に僕たちは毛を作り続けなきゃいけない。
So I like in this scene how you have that contrast between that really intense scene with the T killer cells through to this nice pleasant music where the red blood cell meets the hair follicle. And I like how they've depicted the hair and the hair follicle here with this sort of structure that holds up the hair, which is quite accurate. And interestingly here, the matrix cell also refers to how they're constantly producing hairs in a cyclical manner. And we refer to this as a natural hair cycle, which consists of 4 phases, which include the growing phase, the transitioning phase, the resting phase, and the shedding phase. And you might be asking yourself, well, if there's a shedding phase, surely I would be going bald every couple of months. However, that's not the case because each individual hair on your head might be at a different stage of this cycle, which basically allows for old hairs to be replaced by new hairs and allow you to maintain a mop of hair on your head throughout the year.
色素細胞さん、こっちまだ白いです。
ああ、悪い悪い。すぐ行くぞい。
Ah, nice. And here we're introduced to the pigment cell, and it's his role to maintain the colour of the hair. And I like here how they've depicted the pigment cell as an old grey man, and it looks like there's just one of them, bless him, but there seems to be a lot of matrix cells there. And I guess what they're getting at here is, as we get older, the ability for us to maintain the pigment of our hair does reduce, and so we subsequently end up with more grey or even white hairs. And so demonstrating that the responsibility of maintaining the pigment of the hair as a grey old man himself is quite funny. Gosh, he's making that look easy. Gosh, and I like how the red blood cell here is kind of creeping on the white blood cell, but she's doing those one-hand press-ups, and they are very difficult to do. But I'm really happy to see her back on her feet again from last week's episode, because remember, she's one of the first-line defense cells, and so if another infection got on board, we would really need her help. Okay, T killer cells are back. Passive aggressive. Oh gosh, yeah. Goodness me. And so, you know, just as I was saying that there's some wholesome relationships between the cells, we get the T killer cell coming in, talking some smack and acting all passive aggressive with the white blood cell. But, you know, what he's alluding to here is that his workload has gone through the roof since the battle with the gonorrhea cells, which is alluding to that sort of title of being overworked. So I don't know if this is foreshadowing for something that's going to happen later. Let's have a watch. Gosh, another infection. Sending out T killer cells again. Goodness me, and so the T killer cells are getting dispatched again to fight another infection in the body. And it's important to say that the body is most vulnerable to a secondary infection after it's just gotten over the initial one. And I see this in my practice as a GP. You know, we get patients coming through who've initially started with a cold, but then gone on to develop a chest infection afterwards. And this is basically because the bacteria has been able to take hold when the body's been run down. And it looks like that's what's happening in this body.
せめて白血球、マクロファージにも応援要請をしてみて。
そんなもの必要ない。キラー T 細胞はリンパ球の精鋭部隊。この体を外敵から守る最後の砦。
Yeah, I mean they're really getting the message across here that the system's under stress. You know, with the commander T cell showing characteristic signs of someone who is stressed, with them being irritable, shouting, having a short fuse, and being disproportionately aggressive to helpful suggestions. He's turning into a real Karen. Oh, gosh. Okay, so I mean, I don't know what that button does, but I'm guessing we're going to see it later. I mean, that's foreshadowing if I've ever seen it. But, you know, clearly he's on a rampage against any bugs that are in the body. Gosh, yeah, look at the white of their eyes. I agree. Yeah, I agree. There seems to be something wrong there with the killer T cells. They no longer look like they're responding normally. They're just making this chanting and their eyes have gone white, almost like robots. They're kind of reminding me of the Terminator, which again is another Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. Oh gosh. Oh wow. Oh goodness me, not another infection. Oh yeah, maybe it is. Oh goodness, well it looks like this body's getting infection after infection. And this time it looks like it's affecting the hair follicles. Now the most common infection that causes this is sort of a folliculitis, and the most common reason is where people have either used a dirty or an old razor And what this does, it introduces bacteria into the hair follicle, which then gets inflamed, and you can end up with a rash around the area. Now, in most cases, this tends to be mild and it doesn't need any treatment. It just needs people to not shave for a week or two. However, if it's a large area of skin that's affected and you're feeling poorly with it, sometimes we need to give people a course of antibiotics. Gosh. Wow, oh my goodness. Goodness me. Wow, well that looks very different from how we saw the hair follicle earlier. And the red blood cell there asks, is it that the hair follicle is inflamed? But what does he mean by inflammation? Well, inflammation is the process by which white blood cells and the things that they make protect you from infections. And the characteristic features of inflammation include things like swelling, redness, heat, and pain. And so yes, looking at this area, it's likely to be inflamed. Gosh. Goodness, so seemingly it wasn't a bug or a virus that's done this, it was in fact the T killer cell. Now, when one of the body's own immune cells begin to attack its own cells, we tend to think of conditions called autoimmune diseases. And examples of this include type 1 diabetes or rheumatoid arthritis or psoriasis, or more specifically, an autoimmune disease that characteristically affects the hair follicles could be something like lupus or alopecia areata, which can lead to a patchy type of hair loss.
What's she gonna
do? Oh gosh. Okay, I mean that is pretty funny. He's just gone and stamped on his face. Yeah, I clearly think that there is an autoimmune condition going on at the moment. What's he doing? Gosh, just stamped in the face. Goodness me, so I definitely think that the T killer cell here has gone, a bit delirious. But what does delirious mean? Now, typically when I use the word delirium, what I'm describing is an acute change in your state of mind, which can manifest in a number of symptoms, specifically restlessness, incoherence, or illusions, or delusional thinking, or even hallucinating. And it seems as though the T killer cells have got a few of these features. Now, it's important to mention that there are multiple causes of delirium, ranging from things like simple infections through to side effects of medications or being intoxicated with either alcohol or drugs. Now, unfortunately, delirium is far commoner than people might think, and I see a lot of this in general practice, particularly in the elderly, the frail, and the more vulnerable. Oh, goodness me, it's overwhelming, isn't it? Look at that. Oh, gosh. Goodness. The T killer cell has no mercy. I mean, the pigment cell looks like the most frail and elderly cell there is. Oh gosh, let's see what happens to him. Gosh. Yeah, so this raises an important question here, and that is, why do autoimmune diseases occur? Now, this area of science isn't completely understood, but it's thought that some infections can trigger both healthy cells and tissues to get caught up in an inflammatory process. Other causes that we've found a link with are with specific types of cancer. However, again, this area is incompletely understood, so I can't tell you much more about it. Gosh, yeah, look at that, it's on fire. It's falling out. So it looks like this body's going to experience quite a bit of hair loss here, and I like how they've depicted how the inflamed environment, where it's really unfavourable, would clearly result in the follicles getting destroyed and subsequently leading to hair loss. Who's this guy? Oh, the dendritic cell. Looks very different. Okay, so this is the counterpart to the cheerful dendritic cell that we saw in season 1 of Cells at Work. And he looks a bit different here. He doesn't look as carefree and giggly. But it looks like he's got a lot more insight here into the situation as opposed to the commander T cell. And it looks like he's onto the fact that this is maybe an autoimmune process where the body's attacking itself. Okay, so we're getting a bit more of an insight as to why the commander T cell is advising the killer T cells to attack the hair follicles, and that's because they're rapidly dividing, which is a trait that they share with cancerous cells. So you can kind of understand why the commander T cell has done this, but it's probably not the wisest decision he's made. Cytokines. Okay, he's pressing that a few times, isn't he? So this button basically causes the release of cytokines, which are basically chemicals which allow cells to communicate with one another. Now, there's two main types of cytokines in the body, and you've got the pro-inflammatory cytokines, which encourage inflammation, and you've got the anti-inflammatory cytokines, which help to reduce inflammation. And I can guess that the psychopath of the commander T cell is wanting pro-inflammatory ones. Oh gosh, they've got fumes coming off them. Looks like they're going to go Super Saiyan. Oh. There we go. Transforming. Oh gosh. Alright, so as I guessed correctly there, they were pro-inflammatory cytokines, which are basically signals to reinforce their current behaviour of attacking the hair root cells. But it also looks like they've got a massive energy boost here to swing the tide in their favour. What are they? Looks a bit... I like how they're gold. They kind of remind me of Dio from JoJo. Okay, so, I mean, we haven't seen these cells before, but they look like they're targeting the T killer cells. Could they be like a medication that the body's taken? Gosh. Goodness me. What were they? Ah, they were steroids. Okay, so steroids are basically very strong anti-inflammatories. So what they would do is help to dampen down the inflammatory response that these T killer cells are producing. They're basically the counter to that button that the commander T cell has just pushed. And hopefully they're strong enough to mend the situation. Oh gosh, it looks like they're in his office. How did they get in there? It looks a little unsafe. Okay, so it looks like the steroids are also acting on the commander T cell, but let's see how they've helped with the inflammation that we saw earlier. Okay, things look a lot calmer now, don't they? Oh gosh. He's still quite delirious. So it looks like the steroids have helped to clear up all that inflammation, and as I said, steroids are very strong medications and they tend to work really fast. In fact, patients that I've given steroids to have reported a dramatic improvement in their symptoms within the first 24 hours. Now, it's important to say that you shouldn't just give anyone steroids because there are some really harmful side effects of taking them. So we tend to reserve them for really severe inflammatory conditions where all other medications haven't worked. Oh gosh, he's crying. And I kind of feel sorry here for the killer T cell. You know, he's really done his best there, but he's clearly been stressed, overworked and exhausted. And it's interesting how they've animated him here with the tears, because it looks very similar to the way in which One Piece animate their tears as well. But hopefully, you know, now they've taken the steroids, he can have a bit of rest. Anyway, that's the whole of today's episode, and we've covered so much from delirium to signs of stress all the way through to autoimmune conditions. Now, as always, if you have any specific questions, please leave those down in the comments below and I'll try and get back to you. Otherwise, if you wouldn't mind giving this video a like, it really does help out the channel and it allows me to continue putting videos out like this for you guys to enjoy at home. Also, don't forget to comment where you're watching from today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon for more Cells at Work Code Black. Thanks.